um, four senators of the Federal Trade Commission are urging the Federal Trade Commission to investigate whether Amazon's smart speakers violates federal privacy law. And the trick is, just to boil it down, which you will only get from me probably, is that the speaker phones, these Amazon speakers allow, you can tell kids can ask to be told stories, but it gives kids a power to communicate directly with computers that is, of course, unprecedented in human history. There was a big concern later. I tell my kids why I'm so goofy and mixed up, and I had nightmares for decades about Cuban paratroopers parachuting into my backyard. And when you're 6 years old and the Cuban Missile Crisis is going on, I mean, you have no idea. I had no idea that I'd even been to Cuba, but it was, I didn't know it was a long way away, and that was zero chance of happening. And never had children been exposed to the news at that level until my generation. Where we could sit in front of the TV and kind of get something about what was going on. I remember the Democrat convention in Chicago, and my uncle was there. I remember hearing about that, and people like rioting and all this sort of thing. And we just didn't know what was going on. The kids, we could absorb it, but we couldn't interpret it. And that's what we're seeing now with all the different access vehicles for kids and computers. So I think it is a concern. That said, now what do? Right? Do you block kids? No, probably not. Okay. And there were a bunch of stories today about Facebook, and one of the co-founders, the other guy, not Mark Zuckerberg, Chris Hughes, who claimed to have helped and got a couple of $1 million or something. But he says, Facebook has bought up WhatsApp and Instagram, and that Mark just has more influence than anybody should have. And I'm okay with that. I noticed that Elizabeth Warren was mentioned in the article, and that got me thinking, I wonder who I'll vote for in the Democrat primary. You got to be careful with that, because I think a lot of Democrats crossed over and voted for Trump because they thought he was the biggest goof and impossible to elect. So be careful what you do in the primaries. They're probably the most important vote you'll have. Anyway, so that's that. Let's go over to the important news. Okay, I got an email last night, just to show you how current this is, asking me for our legal corporate address in order to be registered with the California Consumer Privacy Act, CCPA, and was one of my clients. And that just shows you that this has its tentacles moving into everything. Now, we do have the addresses of all the customers of most of our clients, and we also do analysis of those customers, but we don't know. I never see. What I see gets all boiled down to aggregation, and I never see the customers. I never look any up. We would only do that for, to check and see that our scoring is right. So I place orders as an example, and then I can check and see if if I have multiple orders. I know how many times I ordered. I know what I ordered, so I can look up and see if we're getting that right. And that's about the level, but could we do more than that? I suppose we could. That's just not what we do, So, and interestingly, in the next article we'll talk about, it talks about ethics and privacy, and that is the real question. The real question is, do unto others as you would be done by, I think. And it's hard to legislate that. So anyway, there's a flurry of amendments coming through. Flurry. I like that word, flurry. In the California Consumer Privacy Act, its regulation is in flux. And I told the clients the client's compliance officer that this was going to be the case. There were going to be some significant amendments, and they're trying to define the terms. And it's really a good question. What does de-identified information look like? And that's what I was describing, is that I see only de-identified. So I don't even see a customer identity at all. I just see groups of customers that have bought once or twice, that have bought lately or not, that spent a lot or spent a little. I don't know who they are. There's no way for me personally to go back to those people. And so we have a little bit of a wall in our own company, but you could argue that it could be done. And that's one of the amendments. The question is, what's the difference between could be possibly done or reasonably is done? There's quite a bit of difference. So here's some of the amendments. One exempted employee information, job application information, contractor information. So that just can't be trotted out in public. This is an interesting one. It exempts information collected from public records. That's one we use quite a bit. We take the census long form that's been matched to postal code, and we say, okay, you live in a rich neighborhood, you live in a poor neighborhood. So if someone's only bought one time, they've only bought once, and they didn't spend much, and they haven't bought lately, and we have to decide whether to spend $1 on them to send them a catalog or not. Sometimes the people in the rich neighborhoods do better, and sometimes the people in the poor neighborhoods do better. It kind of depends on the product and the context. But that's the kind of information we use in addition to purchase history, because there frankly isn't that much history on most customers. The majority of every client we've ever had, the majority of their customers were one-time buyers. And most of them were old, and we didn't know if they were dead or alive. And so this is an interesting one. Now, another interesting one is one of our clients has just gotten us access to data from a company called Abacus, and they keep track. Companies send their data to Abacus, and then Abacus keeps track of who in your file. You send them your file, and they'll tell you this person hasn't bought from you in a while, but bought from this and this and that. They won't tell you who. They'll tell you 3 or 4 different. Maybe they bought, maybe you're selling women's apparel and they bought men's shoes and they bought, hardware. Maybe that wouldn't be a big hit for you, even though they did buy from you. Their household bought from you once. It's a little difficult to apply. The question is that public information? No. It's going to be really interesting. But maybe if it's de-identified enough and aggregated, maybe then it's okay. It's really tricky stuff. It's going to be interesting to see what happens to those kind of companies. Historically I haven't used it much, because a lot of my clients have said, well, you're trading reactivation of your worst customers. You're trading your best customers to find out how to reactivate your worst ones. And there's some truth to that too. Okay, it would also scupper non-discrimination requirements. That's an interesting one too, because what if we find out that some of our hunting products did best in the Deep South, in the poorer rural areas of the Deep South? If we only promote there, does that discriminate against rich people in the North who might want to receive our mailings? I don't think so. I think it's silly. So segmentation and discrimination are counter-correlated or whatever. The more you segment, the more you discriminate. Interesting stuff. Here's an interesting one too. It's going to take from is capable of being associated to is reasonably capable of being associated. In other words, I could associate information with the customer record, but it would be beyond my skill set. And the guy who does it doesn't know what those numbers mean. I know what the numbers mean. He knows who they are. We don't ever mix them. So it'll be really interesting to see what shakes out. And I'm John Miglock.